They said she was nothing but a scandal waiting to happen. A common flower girl who dared to look at a duke. But history often forgets the wars fought in the shadows of ballrooms and the blood spilled on velvet carpets. When Duke Adrian Thorne banished Elise Vance from London, everyone thought it was an act of cruelty. They were wrong. It was an act of survival. But love is a dangerous thing. It makes men foolish and kings jealous. This isn't just a love story. It's a confession of betrayal, exile, and a rebellion that nearly tore the crown apart. The year was 1814, and London was a city choking on its own opulence. The frost had settled early on the cobblestones of Mayfair, turning the streets into slick, treacherous paths that mirrored the society walking upon them. For Elise Vance, the cold was merely a physical sensation, far less biting than the icy stares of the aristocracy. Elise was not supposed to be here. She was the daughter of a disgraced solicitor, a man who had gambled away his reputation and his life in a singular, tragic night at White's. Left with nothing but a keen mind and a beauty that was more burden than blessing, Elise had found work as a seamstress in the household of Lady Margaret Beauchamp. It was a position of servitude, yet it placed her dangerously close to the sun. Or rather, the sun. Adrian Thorne, the Duke of Ashbourne, was the sun around which London society orbited. He was tall, with the kind of sharp, angular features that sculptors wept over, and eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. He was wealthy, powerful, and utterly ruthless in the House of Lords. He was also engaged to Lady Margaret's daughter, the insipid but incredibly wealthy Clara Beauchamp. The banishment didn't happen all at once. It started with a whisper, a stolen glance in the library, during a masquerade ball. It was late October. The Beauchamp estate was alive with the sound of violins and the clinking of crystal. Elise had been summoned to fix a tear in Clara's hem, a tear caused by Clara purposefully stepping on her own dress in a fit of pique because the Duke had arrived late. Elise was kneeling on the floor of the library, mouth full of pins, stitching the heavy silk brocade, when the heavy oak doors swung open. She froze, expecting a servant. Instead, Adrian Thorne walked in, tearing his cravat loose as if it were strangling him. He didn't see her at first, hidden as she was behind a high-backed velvet chair. He poured himself a brandy, his hand shaking slightly. "Damn him," Adrian muttered, his voice low and vibrating with a fury Elise had never heard. "Damn the king and his impossible demands." Elise shifted, and the floorboard beneath her knee creaked. Adrian spun around, his hand flying to the hilt of a ceremonial sword he wore. "Who's there? Show yourself!" Elise stood up slowly, removing the pins from her mouth. "It is only I, your grace. Elise. I was mending Lady Clara's gown." Adrian's tense posture relaxed, but his eyes narrowed. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. He had seen her in the halls, a ghost in gray wool. But tonight, in the dim firelight, she looked like a painting of a saint, weary but resolute. "Elise," he said, testing the name. "The solicitor's daughter." "The seamstress. Your grace," she corrected softly, eyes lowered. "You heard what I said." "It wasn't a question." "I heard a man frustrated with his monarch. That is not treason, your grace. That is merely Tuesday in Parliament." A bark of laughter escaped him, surprising them both. He stepped closer. The smell of him, brandy, leather, and rain, overwhelmed her senses. "You have a sharp tongue for a seamstress, and you have a heavy heart for a duke." That was the mistake, that moment of honesty. In a world of artifice, honesty is the most seductive thing of all. He didn't kiss her then. He didn't touch her. He simply looked at her with a terrifying intensity, as if he were memorizing her face to sustain him through a famine. Over the next month, the library became their sanctuary. It was innocent at first. He would ask her opinion on legislation regarding the Corn Laws, and she would answer, with a surprising depth of knowledge she'd gleaned from her late father. He found in her an intellectual equal. She found in him a man trapped by duty, desperate for escape. but London has eyes. And the eyes of Lady Margaret Beauchamp were particularly sharp. It all unraveled on the eve of the winter solstice. The king, George IV, then still the Prince Regent, but wielding the power of the throne, had taken a peculiar interest in the Duke's upcoming nuptials. The Regent was a man of appetites, and he had heard rumors of a certain beautiful seamstress hiding in the Beauchamp household. Lady Margaret, sensing a threat to her daughter's engagement and seeing an opportunity to curry favor with the lecherous Regent, hatched a plan. She would offer Elise to the Regent as a companion for the season, removing the distraction from Adrian and securing a title for her nephew in the process. Adrian found out about the arrangement an hour before it was to be executed. He stormed into the servants' quarters, ignoring the gasps of the maids, and found Elise packing her meager belongings. She had been told she was being sent to a new position in the countryside. She didn't know the position was in the Regent's bedchamber. "You are not going," Adrian rasped, grabbing her wrist. Lady Margaret said, "I don't care what that harpy said." He pulled her close, his composure shattering. "She is selling you, Elise. Selling you to the Regent to secure a earldom for her family." Elise went pale. The Regent's reputation was well known. Women went to him and returned broken, if they returned at all. "What can I do? I have no money, no protection." "You have me," Adrian vowed, but he underestimated his enemy. Lady Margaret walked in then, flanked by two burly guards and, to Adrian's horror, the Regent's own private secretary, Sir Thomas Redding. "A touching scene," Lady Margaret sneered, "but the girl belongs to the Crown now. Sir Thomas has the papers." Adrian drew himself up to his full height. "She is a free citizen of England. She belongs to no one." "She has debts," Sir Thomas interjected smoothly, producing a ledger. "Her father's debts. The Crown has purchased them. She works them off, at the pleasure of the prince." It was a trap, a legal, ironclad trap. If Adrian fought them now, he would be arrested for treason. If he did nothing, Elise would be destroyed. He made the only choice he could, a choice that would break both their hearts to save her life. He turned to Elise, his face turning into a mask of cold indifference. He had to make them believe he didn't care. He had to make her leave willingly, to get her out of London before the Regent could claim her. "She is nothing to me," Adrian lied, his voice steady, though his soul was screaming. "Just a distraction. If she has debts, let her pay them. But not here. I will not have a debtor in my future mother-in-law's house." Elise looked at him, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Adrian." "Silence, girl," he snapped. He turned to Sir Thomas. "However, I will pay the debt, on one condition." Sir Thomas raised an eyebrow. "And that is?" "She is banished. Immediately. She leaves London tonight for the north. If she returns within 10 years, the debt is reinstated, and she goes to Newgate Prison." "The north?" Lady Margaret squawked. "But the Regent—" "The Regent wants a willing companion, surely," Adrian said smoothly, "not a crying, unwilling waif. I will pay double the debt into the Crown's coffers if she is gone by midnight." Sir Thomas considered this. Money was always useful, and the Regent's attention span was short. He would forget the girl in a week. "Agreed." Adrian refused to look at Elise as the guards escorted her out. He couldn't bear to see the hatred in her eyes. He had just saved her from a fate worse than death, but in doing so, he had to become the villain of her story. As the carriage rattled away into the dark, snowy night, carrying Elise toward the bleak moors of Yorkshire, Adrian Thorne stood at the window, watching the taillights fade. "Hate me, Elise," he whispered to the glass. "Hate me so that you stay away, because if you come back, I will burn this city to the ground to keep you." But fate and the king were not done with them yet. Elise Vance did not weep during the journey north. Tears were a luxury for women who had hope, and Adrian Thorne had stripped her of that with a few cruel sentences. The betrayal sat in her chest like a stone. She replayed the scene in the servants' quarters over and over, the coldness in his eyes, the way he dismissed her as a distraction. She arrived in Yorkshire 3 days later, battered by the journey and the biting wind. Her destination was Blackwood Manor, a crumbling estate owned by a distant, reclusive cousin of the Duke's who needed a governess for his unruly ward. This was Adrian's doing, too. He had arranged the position. It felt less like a job and more like a prison sentence. The master of Blackwood was Lord Adrian Thorne, a man twisted by war injuries and bitterness. He was Adrian's older cousin, the rightful heir to the dukedom, had he not been disinherited by their grandfather for marrying a French actress. Stellan hated Adrian with a burning passion. When Elise arrived, Stellan greeted her in the drafty hall, leaning heavily on a cane. "So," Stellan sneered, circling her, "you're the little bird Adrian cast out of the nest. He pays me a handsome stipend to keep you here, you know, to keep you buried." "I am here to teach your ward, my lord," Elise said, chin held high, "not to discuss your cousin." "You have spirit," Stellan laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "You'll need it. The North eats soft southern flowers for breakfast." For 2 years, Elise survived. She taught Stellan's ward, a wild 10-year-old girl named Matilda, how to read and write. She learned to chop wood, to navigate the moors in the fog, and to shoot a pistol. The harsh landscape hardened her. The naive seamstress died in the Yorkshire frost, and a woman of steel emerged. She stopped writing letters to her friends in London. She stopped asking for news. She walled off her heart. But back in London, Adrian was living a nightmare. He had married Clara Beauchamp as planned. It was a union of ice and silence. Clara was vapors and vanity, concerned only with her social standing. Adrian spent his days in Parliament, fighting the regent's excesses, earning a reputation as a dangerous radical. He was channeling his rage into politics, trying to weaken the monarchy that had threatened the woman he loved. The Prince Regent, now King George IV, had not forgotten the slight. He knew Adrian had maneuvered the girl away from him. The king was petty, vindictive, and bored. He began to squeeze Adrian. He stripped the Duke of his honorary military titles. He raised taxes on the Ashbourne estates. He spread rumors of Adrian's insanity. Then, the king played his ace. It was the summer of 1816. A royal messenger arrived at Adrian's townhouse with a sealed parchment. It was a summons. The king was planning a royal tour of the north, and he required the Duke of Ashbourne to accompany him. Specifically, the king wished to visit Blackwood Manor. Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. The king knew. He knew exactly where Elise was. This wasn't a tour, it was a hunting trip, and Elise was the prey. Adrian rode north ahead of the royal procession, killing 3 horses in his haste. He had to get there first. He had to move her again. He arrived at Blackwood in the middle of a thunderstorm. He pounded on the heavy doors until Stellan opened them, a smirk plastered on his scarred face. "Cousin," Stellan drawled, "to what do I owe the pleasure? Run out of whores in London?" "Where is she?" Adrian demanded, pushing past him. "Where is Elise?" "She's out on the moors," Stellan said, gesturing vaguely to the rain-lashed window. "She likes the storms. Says they remind her of you." Adrian didn't wait. He ran out into the driving rain, shouting her name. He found her near the old stone bridge, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face. She looked wild, fierce, and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. She saw him and froze. For a second he saw the old tenderness in her eyes, instantly replaced by a wall of ice. "You," she spat, backing away. "Have you come to check if I'm dead yet? Or did you come to sell me to someone else?" "Elise, listen to me," Adrian shouted over the wind, stepping closer. "You are in danger. The king is coming. He knows you are here. Let him come," she screamed. "I fear no man, least of all a fat king or a lying duke. I did what I did to save you." Adrian grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. "I banished you because he was going to take you that night. He had the papers, Elise. I had to make him think I didn't care. or he would have used you to destroy me and then discarded you like trash." Elise stopped struggling. The rain mingled with the tears she finally allowed to fall. You lied?" Every word was a lie. He choked out. "I have loved you since the moment you scolded me in the library. I have died every day since you left." He pulled her into his arms, and for a moment, the world stopped. The anger melted away, replaced by 2 years of starvation. He kissed her, a desperate, searing kiss that tasted of rain and desperation. But the moment was shattered by the sound of bugles in the distance. The royal procession was early. "We have to go," Adrian said, pulling away. "I have a ship waiting at the coast. We can make it to France." "No," a voice boomed from the darkness. They turned to see Stellan standing on the ridge, flanked by redcoats. But these weren't just any soldiers. They were the king's personal guard, and standing next to Stellan was Sir Thomas Redding. "Treason, I believe," Sir Thomas said, smiling thinly. "Conspiring to abduct a ward of the crown. And is that the king's enemy you are kissing, Miss Vance?" Stellan had betrayed them. He had sent word to the king the moment Adrian arrived. "Take them," Sir Thomas ordered. "The king wants to see the Duke, and he is very eager to finally meet the girl." Adrian drew his sword, stepping in front of Elise. "Over my dead body!" "That," Sir Thomas said, signaling the soldiers to aim their muskets, "can be arranged." The fight was brutal and short. Adrian was one of the finest swordsmen in England, but he was 1 man against 12. He disarmed 2 guards and knocked Stellan into the mud, but a musket butt to the back of the head brought him down. When he woke, he was not in Yorkshire. The damp chill of stone told him exactly where he was before he even opened his eyes. The Tower of London. He was chained to the wall in a cell that smelled of rot and despair. His head throbbed and his fine clothes were in tatters. The heavy iron door creaked open. It wasn't a jailer. It was King George IV himself, holding a scented handkerchief to his nose, looking out of place in his silks and velvets against the grime of the dungeon. "Your Grace," the king said, his voice high and mocking, "you have caused me a great deal of trouble." "Where is she?" Adrian rasped, straining against the chains. "Miss Vance? She is quite comfortable. She is currently a guest in the royal apartments. My wife is away, so I have the palace to myself." Adrian roared, pulling at the chains until his wrists bled. "If you touch her, I will end your line. I will tear this kingdom apart stone by stone." The king chuckled, though he took a step back. "Such passion, it is wasted on a seamstress. But I am a merciful king. I have a proposition. I want no bargains with tyrants." "Oh, you will want this one," the king said, stepping closer. "You see, the people love you, Adrian. You and your speeches about liberty and reform. If I execute you, I make you a martyr. The streets will riot. I don't want riots." "Then let us go." "No, I need you to be destroyed, dismantled, humiliated." The king leaned in, his breath sour. "Here is the deal. I will hold a trial. You will confess to treason. You will confess that you embezzled funds, that you sold secrets to the French, and that you seduced Miss Vance against her will." "I will never say that. If you do," the king continued, ignoring him, "I will put Miss Vance on a ship to America, safe, unharmed, with enough gold to live like a queen. If you refuse, I will execute her first, right here, in front of you, and then I will hang you." Adrian stared at the king. It was the same choice as before, but the stakes were final. To save her, he had to destroy his name, his honor, and his legacy forever. He would go down in history as a traitor and a monster. "You need to decide quickly," the king said, checking his pocket watch. "I have a dinner engagement, and Miss Vance is the main course." "I need proof," Adrian whispered, his spirit breaking. "I need to see her on the ship." "You are in no position to make demands." "But, very well, you will write the confession now. Tonight, you will be taken to the docks to see her off. Then, you return here to await the hangman." Adrian took the quill the king offered. His hand shook, not from fear, but from rage. He wrote the words that ended his life. I, Adrian Thorne, Duke of Ashbourne, hereby confess. That night, under the cover of fog, Adrian was hauled to the London docks in a cage wagon. He watched through the bars as a small figure was led up the gangplank of a merchant ship bound for Boston. It was Elise. She looked back once, searching the darkness. She didn't see him. "Goodbye, my love," Adrian whispered. The ship cast off. The king's guards laughed and turned the wagon back toward the tower. But the king had made a mistake. He had underestimated the loyalty Adrian inspired. The driver of the wagon was not a royal guard. It was a man named Jack Hawkins, a former soldier who had served under Adrian in the Peninsula War. Adrian had once saved Jack from a firing squad. As the wagon rattled over the cobblestones away from the docks, Jack leaned back and whispered through the bars. "Hold tight, Your Grace. The road gets bumpy here." "Jack?" Adrian breathed. "We ain't going back to the tower, sir. The lads are waiting at Southwark." "But Elise, she's on the ship." "Is she?" Jack grinned in the dark. "Or is that just what we wanted the king to think?" Adrian's heart hammered against his ribs. Suddenly, the wagon lurched. An explosion rocked the street ahead. A barrel of gunpowder set off to create a diversion. In the chaos, Jack whipped the horses down a narrow alleyway. They stopped in a secluded courtyard behind a tannery. The back of the wagon was torn open. Rough hands pulled Adrian out and cut his chains. He looked up to see a group of men, radicals, soldiers, commoners, and standing in the center of them, wearing breeches and a man's coat, was Elise. She hadn't been on the ship. The woman on the gangplank was a decoy, a maid paid to take the journey. "You didn't think I'd leave you behind this time, did you?" Elise said, her voice trembling but fierce. Adrian fell to his knees, embracing her. "How?" "We have friends, Adrian," she said, running her hands through his matted hair. "You fought for the people. Now the people are fighting for you." "But the king." Adrian looked around at the small band of rebels. "He will hunt us down. He has the army." "Let him try," Elise said, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "He took everything from us. He banished me. He imprisoned you. He tried to break us. Now, we are going to take his city." Adrian stood up. He looked at the men waiting for his command. He looked at the woman who had crossed hell to find him. "No," Adrian said, his voice hardening into the tone of a general. "We aren't going to hide. If the king wants a war, we shall give him one." "What are you saying?" Elise asked. Adrian took a sword from Jack Hawkins. The steel gleamed in the moonlight. "I'm saying we don't run. We go to Parliament. Tomorrow is the state opening. The king will be there. And I have a confession to read, but it won't be the one he wrote for me." The rebellion had begun. The hideout in Southwark smelled of untreated leather, stale beer, and nervous sweat. It was a subterranean chamber beneath the tannery, lit by sputtering tallow candles that threw long, dancing shadows against the damp brick walls. 20 men were gathered there, the refuse of the Napoleonic Wars, men England had used up and thrown away. But they remembered Adrian Thorne not as a duke in silks, but as the major at Salamanca who had held the line when the French cavalry charged, standing shoulder to shoulder with them in the mud. Adrian sat at a rough wooden table, staring at a map of Westminster. He was still in the tattered remains of his finery from the tower, the grime of the dungeon clinging to him, but his eyes were clear, burning with a cold, hard resolve. Elise sat opposite him. She had shed the man's coat and was dressed in a simple linen shift belonging to a tanner's wife. In the flickering light, Adrian could see the changes the North had wrought. The soft curve of her jaw was sharper now, her hands calloused. The girl who had blushed when he looked at her in the library was gone. In her place was a survivor. "It's suicide, Your Grace," said Jack Hawkins, leaning over the map. "The state opening. The place will be crawling with the household cavalry. Even if we get inside, we'll never get out." "We don't need to get out," Adrian said, his voice flat. "We just need to get in. We need to be heard." "To what end?" Elise asked quietly. The room fell silent. She looked at Adrian, her gaze unwavering. "You want to die, Adrian? Is that it? A glorious martyrdom to wash away the guilt of sending me away?" Adrian flinched. "I want to expose him. I want the peers of the realm to see the rot sitting on the throne. If I have to die to do it, then so be it. I have nothing left to lose." "You have me," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Or did you forget you just got me back?" She stood up and walked around the table, placing a hand on his shoulder. The contact sent a jolt through him. It was the first time she had willingly touched him since he had found her in the rain at Blackwood. "We are not going to die," Elise declared, turning to the room. "We are going to win. But a sword won't be enough. George IV doesn't care about honor. He cares about power. And we need to take it from him." "How, lass?" Hawkins asked. "He's the king." Elise reached into the bodice of her dress and pulled out a small, oilskin-wrapped packet. She placed it on the map of Westminster. "Adrian Thorne was a cruel man, but he was also a hoarder," Elise explained. "He kept everything, including the papers of his late wife, the French actress." Adrian frowned. "What do an actress's old scripts have to do with this?" "She wasn't just an actress, Adrian. Before she married Stellan, she was a courier for the French royalists during the Terror. She moved information across the channel." Elise unwrapped the packet, revealing yellowed letters sealed with unfamiliar wax crests. "Stellan kept these hidden under a loose floorboard in my room. I found them 6 months ago." She pushed one specific letter toward Adrian. "Read this one. It's dated 1785. It's from a curate in Mayfair to a contact in Paris." Adrian picked up the fragile paper. As he read, his eyes widened. The blood drained from his face, leaving him ghostly pale beneath the grime. He looked up at Elise, utter disbelief in his eyes. Is this genuine?" he whispered. Stellan believed it was. He was saving it for a rainy day, to blackmail the crown if he ever needed to. He just died before it rained hard enough. "What is it, sir?" Jack demanded. Adrian looked around the room at the ragged band of rebels. He held up the letter. "This," he said, his voice trembling with the magnitude of what he held, "is the end of George IV." The letter detailed a secret ceremony. A marriage, not the king's official, miserable marriage to Caroline of Brunswick, but an earlier one. A marriage to a commoner, a Catholic widow named Maria Fitzherbert. If proven, the king was a bigamist. Under the Royal Marriages Act, his current reign was illegitimate. "He isn't just a tyrant," Adrian breathed, a terrifying smile spreading across his face. "He's a usurper." The mood in the cellar shifted instantly from desperate resignation to electric hope. This wasn't a protest anymore, it was a coup. "The plan changes," Adrian announced, slamming his hand down on the map. "We don't just disrupt the speech. We put the king on trial, right there in the House of Lords." He looked at Elise, awe and old love warring in his chest. The seamstress he had tried to protect had just handed him the weapon to slay a giant. "We will need disguises," Adrian said, his mind racing. "Good ones. We have to get close to the throne. Elise, you must come with us. You found the evidence. You must present it." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," she said, a dangerous smile mirroring his own. They had 12 hours until the state opening of Parliament. 12 hours to prepare to overthrow a king. The November air was thick with fog and the smell of coal smoke as the great and the good of England converged on the Palace of Westminster. Carriages lined the streets, depositing dukes, earls, and bishops in their sweeping robes. The atmosphere was tense. The city was restless, suffering under high taxes and food shortages, and the king's extravagance was a constant slap in the face to the populace. Inside the House of Lords, the chamber was a sea of scarlet and ermine. Sunlight struggled through the high, stained glass windows. At the far end, upon the gilded throne, sat King George IV. He was bloated, trussed up in coronation robes that seemed too tight, his face powdered white to hide the ravages of excess. He began his speech, his voice nasal and bored, droning on about the need for stability and order, completely disconnected from the suffering outside his walls. High in the visitors' gallery, disguised as wealthy merchants and their wives, sat Jack Hawkins and 10 of his men. They wore pistols concealed beneath their heavy coats. Down on the floor of the house, near the entrance, 2 figures stood in the shadows of a towering marble column. They were dressed in the black robes of junior clerks, hoods pulled low. Adrian felt Elise's hand brush his. It was steady. He squeezed it once, then stepped out of the shadows. The king was mid-sentence, and we shall ensure that agitators and radicals are swiftly dealt with. Like you dealt with me, George? Adrian's voice, though not shouted, cut through the droning speech like a knife. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The entire chamber fell deathly silent. Every head turned. The king froze. He squinted into the dim light of the chamber. "Who speaks?" Adrian pulled back his hood. Gasps rippled through the room. Men stood up, knocking over benches. "Adrian Thorne," the king whispered, his face turning a mottled shade of purple. "You are dead. You are in the tower waiting to hang." "I am the Duke of Ashbourne," Adrian declared, his voice rising, resonating with the authority he had been born to. He walked slowly down the center aisle toward the throne. "And I am a peer of this realm, and I say you have no right to sit in that chair." "Guards!" the king shrieked, standing up. "Seize him! Kill him where he stands! It's treason!" The royal guards, stationed around the throne, hesitated. They were used to ceremonial duty, not assassinating dukes on the floor of Parliament. "Ho!" The booming voice came from the front row. The Duke of Wellington, the hero of Waterloo, stood up. He was a stern, uncompromising man who respected order above all else, but he respected courage too. Let the man speak. He is a peer. He has the right to be heard before he is arrested. "He has no rights," the king spat. "He is a confessed traitor." "I confess to nothing but your own corruption," Adrian said, reaching the space before the throne. He pulled a scroll from his robe, not the king's forced confession, but a new one he had written in the cellar. "I accuse you, George Augustus Frederick, of abusing the power of the crown to satisfy your own debauched appetites. I accuse you of false imprisonment. I accuse you of tyranny against the people of England." The lords were murmuring loudly now. This was unprecedented. The king laughed, a brittle, panicked sound. "Is that it? More radical speeches? You bore me, Adrian. Guards, I command you, cut him down." 2 guards stepped forward, swords drawn. "And I accuse you," another voice rang out, clear and soprano, "of bigamy." Elise stepped out from behind the column, pulling back her hood. Her golden hair spilled over the black clerk's robe. She walked down the aisle, her head held high, every inch a queen in her own right. The king looked at her as if he were seeing a ghost. "The seamstress!" he breathed. "You tried to buy me," Elise said, stopping beside Adrian. "You tried to steal me. You tried to kill me. But I am still here, and I know what you are." "She is mad," the king stammered, looking around at the sea of faces. "Remove this woman." "Show them, Elise," Adrian said softly. Elise produced the oilskin packet. "These are letters from the curate who performed the ceremony in 1785. A marriage between the Prince Regent and Maria Fitzherbert. A Catholic." The silence in the room was absolute. It was a deeper, heavier silence than before. This wasn't just a scandal. This was a constitutional crisis that could shatter the monarchy. "Lies!" the king screamed, stepping down from the dais, his composure utterly destroyed. "Forgery! Give me those!" He lunged at Elise. Adrian stepped in front of her, drawing a sword he had concealed beneath his robes. The ring of steel echoed through the chamber. "Another step, George," Adrian snarled, point of his sword aimed at the king's chest. "And I will finish what the French started." Pandemonium erupted. The sight of a duke drawing a sword on the king in the House of Lords broke the spell of civility. It was a sacrilege. "Treason! Protect the king!" yelled Lord Liverpool, the Prime Minister. The royal guards, snapped out of their hesitation by the immediate physical threat to the monarch, charged forward. But before they could reach Adrian and Elise, a shot rang out from the gallery above. A chandelier chain snapped, sending crystal crashing down onto the guards below, scattering them. Up in the gallery, Jack Hawkins and his men threw off their disguise coats, brandishing pistols and cutlasses. "For Ashbourne! For liberty!" Jack roared. The floor of the House of Lords dissolved into chaos. Peers in heavy robes scrambled over benches, trying to flee. Some, the younger, more militaristic lords, drew ceremonial swords and joined the fray on the side of the king. Others, secret sympathizers with Adrian's reformist views, used the confusion to block the guards. Adrian was a whirlwind of steel. He fought not with the elegant fencing style of the dueling grounds, but with the brutal efficiency of a soldier. He parried a guard's thrust, riposted, and sent the man tumbling backward over the woolsack, the large red cushion symbolizing the Lord Speaker's seat. "Get to Wellington!" Adrian shouted to Elise over the din of clashing swords and screaming peers. "Show him the papers! He's the only one they'll listen to!" Elise didn't hesitate. While Adrian held the center aisle, holding back 3 guards single-handedly, she ducked under a swinging sword and sprinted toward where the Iron Duke stood, calmly observing the carnage, like a general on a battlefield. A young captain of the guard intercepted her, grabbing her arm. "Give me the papers, girl, or I'll run you through!" Elise didn't freeze. The Yorkshire moors had taught her better. She stomped hard on his instep, and as he yelled in pain, she drove her elbow backward into his nose with a sickening crunch. He staggered back, blood spurting. She reached Wellington. The great general looked down at the disheveled, fierce woman standing amidst the ruin of the English aristocracy. "My Lord Duke," she panted, thrusting the letters at him. "Read them. If you believe in justice, read them." Wellington took the letters. He didn't look at them immediately. He looked at the king, who was cowering behind the throne, screaming for more guards. He looked at Adrian Thorne, fighting like a lion to protect the woman he loved and the truth he carried. Enough! Wellington's voice, famously able to be heard across miles of battlefield, boomed above the chaos. He drew his own sword, not to fight, but he slammed the flat of the blade against a wooden bench with a crack like thunder. The fighting didn't stop entirely, but it slowed. All eyes turned to the Iron Duke. Wellington opened the letters. He read them quickly, his granite expression never changing. When he looked up, his eyes were hard. He walked slowly toward the throne, the sea of combatants parting before him. He stopped at the foot of the dais and looked up at the shivering king. "Your Majesty," Wellington said coldly, "is this true?" "It's a plot, a Jacobin plot," George IV gibbered. "The seal on this document is authentic," Wellington said, his voice dripping with icy disdain. "You have deceived the nation, sir. You have deceived Parliament. And you have deceived me." The king looked at Wellington, and he knew it was over. The army would follow Wellington, not him. Without the army, he was nothing. Wellington turned to the room. "Guards, stand down!" The guards lowered their weapons. Adrian lowered his sword, his chest heaving. He looked across the wrecked chamber at Elise. She was bruised, her hair wild, her clerk's robe torn, standing next to Wellington. She had never looked more magnificent. The king slumped down on the steps of the throne, weeping openly, tears of self-pity, not remorse. The golden cage he had built for himself had finally collapsed. The silence that descended upon the House of Lords was heavy enough to crush a man. It was not the silence of peace, but the vacuum before a thunderclap. The Duke of Wellington stood like a granite statue at the foot of the dais, the scandalous letters clutched in his gloved hand. King George IV, the most powerful man in the empire, shrank back into the velvet cushions of his throne, looking less like a monarch and more like a frightened child caught in a lie. Elise stood beside Adrian, her chest heaving from the exertion of the run and the fight. Her hand found his in the gloom, her fingers lacing through his. His grip was iron-tight. They were surrounded by the wreckage of the English aristocracy, overturned benches, scattered papers, and peers of the realm cowering behind pillars. "Well?" The Prime Minister, Lord Liverpool, stepped forward, his face ashen. He looked from the King to Wellington. "My Lord Duke, what do the papers say?" Wellington looked up. His eyes, usually cold and tactical, held a flicker of profound disgust as he looked at the King. He knew that if he read the contents aloud, confirming the King's marriage to the Catholic widow Maria Fitzherbert, the monarchy would fall. The mob outside, already rioting for Adrian, would storm the palace. There would be a republic by morning, and blood in the gutters by noon. Wellington made a choice. Not for the King, but for England. "These papers," Wellington announced, his voice booming to the rafters, "contain matters of extreme personal delicacy regarding His Majesty's health." A collective exhale rippled through the room. It was a lie. Everyone knew it was a lie. But it was a lie that offered them a way out. However, Wellington continued, turning his gaze sharply to the King. "They also suggest that His Majesty is currently unfit to govern without strict counsel, and that the charges of treason against the Duke of Ashbourne are unfounded." The King opened his mouth to protest, to scream, to order their execution. But he met Adrian's eyes. In the Duke's gaze there was no fear, only a promise of mutual destruction. If the King spoke, Adrian would shout the truth about the marriage to the entire room. The King slumped. "Unfounded," George croaked, the word tasting like bile. "Yes, a mistake." The tension broke. The guards sheathed their swords. But the battle was not over. It merely moved from the open floor of Parliament to the shadowed confines of power. 3 hours later, Adrian and Elise sat in the private antechamber of the Speaker's house. The room was lined with dark oak and smelled of beeswax and old parchment. They had refused to be separated, despite the protestations of the clerks. The door opened, and Wellington entered, followed by the Prime Minister. Wellington threw the packet of letters onto the table between them. "You have played a dangerous game, Ashbourne," Wellington said, pouring himself a glass of sherry with a steady hand. "You held a knife to the throat of the British Empire. I held a mirror to a tyrant." Adrian countered, his voice rasping from the smoke and shouting, "There is a difference." "Not to me," Wellington said dryly, "but here we are. The King is broken. He has agreed to retreat to Windsor. He will not interfere with Parliament again. In exchange, these letters burn." "Today," Elise spoke up, her voice clear and startlingly authoritative in the room of powerful men. "And what of us?" Wellington turned to her. He assessed her, not as a seamstress, but as a combatant who had flanked his guards and delivered the killing blow. "You are a problem, Miss Vance. You know too much." "I am the Duchess of Ashbourne," she corrected him, lifting her chin. Adrian looked at her, surprised. They weren't married. Not yet. "In spirit, if not in law," Elise continued, her eyes blazing. "And if you think I will disappear into the shadows again, you are mistaken. I survived the North. I survived the King. I will not be erased by a Prime Minister." Lord Liverpool looked uncomfortable. "The scandal! A duke marrying a servant." "Is preferable to a king marrying a Catholic," Adrian interjected smoothly. "Unless you want me to reconsider burning those letters?" Wellington actually smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "Very well. Here are the terms. The treason charges are expunged. Your estates are secure. But you will leave London. The King cannot see you. The sight of you reminds him of his leash. You will retire to the country for, let us say, a significant period. Exile again? Adrian asked bitterly. No, Elise said, placing a hand on his arm. She looked at Wellington. Freedom. We don't want your court. We don't want your balls, your gossip, or your poison. We want out. Wellington nodded. He picked up the letters and tossed them into the fireplace. The flames licked at the yellowed paper, curling the edges. As the proof of the king's crime turned to ash, the heavy weight that had sat on Adrian's shoulders for years finally evaporated. Go, Wellington said, turning his back to the fire, before I change my mind. They did not leave immediately. Adrian had wounds to heal, both physical and spiritual. They retreated to Ashbourne House, turning the grand London mansion into a fortress against the world. For weeks, the snow fell relentlessly, burying the grime of the city under a pristine white blanket. Inside, the house was quiet. The servants moved in hushed tones, treating Elise with a terrified reverence. She was the woman who had walked into Parliament and brought down a king. But between Adrian and Elise there was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of two people relearning each other. They had changed. The Adrian who had banished her was a desperate man playing a role. The Elise who returned was a warrior forged in ice. One evening, Adrian found her in the library, the very room where they had first met. She was standing by the window, watching the gas lamps flicker on the street below. He didn't announce himself. He simply watched her. She was wearing a dress of deep blue velvet, the color of the midnight sky, but she wore it with the ease of someone who no longer cared for fashion. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. Elise didn't turn. "Regret what?" "The cost. You lost your innocence. You lost years of your life in Yorkshire because of me. And now you are bound to a man the world thinks is a radical lunatic." She turned then, and the look in her eyes took his breath away. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, aching tenderness. "I regret nothing, Adrian. Innocence is overrated. It makes you weak. I would rather be scarred and standing here with you than whole and alone." She walked across the room and stopped in front of him. She reached up and traced the faint line of a scar on his temple, a souvenir from the fight in the tower. "But this city," she whispered, "it suffocates us. I see the king's face in every window. I hear Stellan's laugh in the wind. We cannot be happy here." "I know," Adrian admitted. "I feel it too. It's a graveyard of who we used to be." "Then let's leave it to the ghosts," she said. "Take me home, Adrian, not to your estate in the south, not to the prison in the north. Take me somewhere new." They left at dawn 2 days later. There was no fanfare, no retinue of carriages. Just a single coach, packed with books, warm furs, and the few possessions that actually mattered. As they crossed the city limits, heading north towards the Scottish border, Adrian looked back one last time. The dome of St. Paul's rose above the smog, a monument to a world of rules and hierarchies that he had finally rejected. He took off his signet ring, the heavy gold crest of the Duchy of Ashbourne, and rolled it between his fingers. It was the symbol of his power, but also his chain. "What are you doing?" Elise asked, watching him. "I am the Duke of Ashbourne," he said quietly. "But that man died in the tower. I don't know who I am yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out." He didn't throw the ring away. He wasn't foolish. The title protected them, but he put it into his pocket. He took her hand instead. The journey north was a pilgrimage. As they passed the industrial smoke of the Midlands and entered the wild, rolling hills of the borderlands, the tension seemed to drain from their bodies. The air became sharper, cleaner. They settled in a small stone manor on the edge of a loch in the highlands. It was isolated, battered by winds and rain, surrounded by purple heather and ancient mountains. It was perfect. 3 years later, the rumors in London said that the Duke of Ashbourne had gone mad. They said he walked the cliffs screaming at the sea. They said his duchess, the former seamstress, was a witch who had enchanted him. The reality was far more mundane and far more beautiful. Adrian sat on a wooden bench overlooking the loch, a notebook on his knee. He was writing, not laws, not speeches, but a history of the common people. He looked up as he heard laughter. Elise was walking up the path from the water. She was wearing men's breeches and a loose shirt, her hair wind-blown and wild. She carried a basket of wild herbs in one hand. Running ahead of her, chasing a sheepdog, was a toddling boy with dark curls and storm-gray eyes. Adrian watched them, a lump forming in his throat. He had fought a king. He had nearly lost his head. He had burned his reputation to ash. And looking at them, his wife, his son, his life, he knew he had won the only victory that mattered. Elise reached him, breathless and flushed with the cold. She dropped the basket and sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "The king died," she said softly. A rider brought the news from the village. "George is dead." Adrian looked out at the water. He felt nothing, no triumph, no anger. The king was just a shadow from a bad dream he had finally woken up from. "Let him rot," Adrian said, wrapping his arm around her. "We have work to do." "Work?" She raised an eyebrow, smiling. "Yes, that roof in the barn needs fixing, and I promised Leo I'd teach him how to fish." Elise laughed, and the sound echoed off the mountains, louder and more joyous than any fanfare. They were exiles. They were outcasts. But as the sun set over the highlands, painting the sky in violent streaks of gold and violet, Adrian Thorne and Elise Vance were the freest people on earth. Adrian and Elise's story reminds us that history isn't just made by kings signing treaties. Sometimes it's forged by acts of desperate defiance born of love. They risked everything, title, honor, and life itself, to break free from a corrupt system that sought to crush them. It's a powerful testament to the idea that true nobility comes not from bloodlines, but from the courage to stand against tyranny, even when the tyrant wears a crown. What did you think of this dramatic retelling? Do you believe love is worth fighting a kingdom for? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey through romance and rebellion, please give this video a like, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another incredible tale from the past.